My husband brought his work wife on our anniversary trip to Hawaii. When I got upset, he said I was being insecure and that men need female friends. Now he's begging me not to sign the divorce papers. I was heading to the airport when my husband Jerry texted me, "I have a surprise. Hope you'll like it." I raced past the crowd of people at the entrance and spotted him at the check-in counter. But he wasn't alone. "Surprise! I invited Sasha," he said, gesturing to his 26-year-old coworker who stood there with 2 pink suitcases. The same woman who had him texting past midnight, sending hearts and selfies. She's never been to Hawaii and just went through such a rough breakup. "I knew you wouldn't mind." Sasha hugged me like we were best friends. "You're so lucky to have such a thoughtful husband," she said. "He used your miles to book my ticket so I could afford it." I stood there frozen while Jerry showed me the boarding passes. "Aisle seat for me." Sasha had the window and Jerry between us. "I know you like to sleep on planes anyway," he said to Sasha. She giggled a quick thank you. He handed over mine, then frowned when he saw my face. "Don't be weird about this," he whispered in my ear. "This is just corporate culture. Everyone treats their work wife this way." After checking in and dropping our bags off in the hotel lobby, Jerry suggested we grab a late lunch at the beachfront restaurant. The hostess smiled and said, "Party of 3, right? Your husband changed the reservation last month." I felt my chest tighten. Our anniversary lunch. He'd planned for 3 people a month ago. As if things couldn't get worse, the meal itself felt like torture. Sasha sat between us, sharing bites off Jerry's plate and telling stories about their office inside jokes, while I sat there feeling like an outcast. On our way back through the lobby, he stopped at the spa desk. "I want to book tomorrow's couples massage," he said to the receptionist, pulling out his credit card. "For me and—" he pointed at Sasha. "Her." When I stared at him, he shrugged. "You hate massages anyway." "No, I said that we can't afford them," I told him. Jerry shrugged. "Same difference. It's not a big deal." But it was. It was a huge deal to me. And I was determined to put an end to it. "I'm sorry, but their massages should be separate," I told the spa desk. The receptionist gave an awkward smile and nodded, adjusting their appointment while Sasha flashed an annoyed expression at Jerry. He quickly pulled me aside near the elevators, his grip painfully tight on my arm. "You're embarrassing me with this middle school jealousy," he hissed. "Everyone's gonna think you're crazy. Is that what you want?" I shook my head slowly and his grip loosened, sighing. "You know, every successful man has a work wife," Jerry said, signaling for another round. "You're lucky I'm transparent about it. Most guys hide it." But the worst part of the trip happened when we finally went upstairs to our room. I felt my blood boil when the door opened. There was one king bed and a tiny pull-out couch that was shoved in the corner. "This'll be perfect for the 3 of us," he grinned. Sasha made a big show of volunteering to take the couch. "I don't want to cause any problems," she said sweetly, looking at Jerry like they were sharing some private joke. "You two should have the bed. It's your anniversary." I crawled into bed that night feeling like a stranger in my own marriage. Jerry gave me a quick peck on the forehead before turning away. "See? Everything's fine. You always make such a big deal out of nothing." I woke up at 2 a.m. to whispering and giggling. Through the darkness, I watched my husband get up and walk over to the couch. "Come on," he whispered to Sasha. "The bed's huge. She won't even notice." I heard her fake protest for about 2 seconds before following him back. She slipped under the covers on his side, and he pulled her close against him. "She's out cold," he whispered. I lay there for another hour, completely still, listening to their synchronized breathing, his hand on her waist, her head on his chest, in our anniversary bed. When I couldn't take it anymore, I slipped out and locked myself in the bathroom with my phone. I booked the next flight home using his credit card. I packed in the dark, then took photos of them tangled together just before I left. The Uber to the airport cost $200. I didn't care. I blocked his number during takeoff and watched the missed calls pile up when I landed back home hours later. I wasted no time and found a lawyer to help me handle this mess, collecting evidence, drawing up divorce papers. And that Monday when Sasha and Jerry returned to work, I marched into their office building with my lawyer, ready to see heads roll. The entire C-suite was in their quarterly planning meeting, and I thought, wow, perfect timing. Jerry's face went from confused to white when he saw me walk in. "Sorry to interrupt," I said, handing him the divorce papers in front of everyone. "But I wanted to make sure you got these, since you were too busy on our anniversary to notice I left." Everyone stared quietly. His boss started to speak, but I wasn't done. I opened my laptop and hit send on the email I'd drafted to HR. "I've just sent you receipts for the romantic dinners, the couple's massage, and the first-class ticket to Hawaii that Jerry purchased for his coworker using the company card, listed as client entertainment." The CEO's face twisted sourly. "He used company funds for your anniversary trip?" "Oh no," I said, pulling up the photo on my phone. "He used them for Sasha's trip. Our anniversary trip was just the 3 of us in one bed." I set the photo on the conference table. Jerry and Sasha tangled together in bed. That's when Sasha screamed. "Wait, it's not what you think." Tristan stood up so fast his chair rolled backward and hit the wall behind him. He held up both hands and pointed at the door with one sharp motion. Everyone else in the room started gathering their laptops and folders while keeping their eyes down like they didn't want to be part of this mess. I watched them file out one by one, some of them glancing back at the photo still sitting on the conference table. Tristan waited until the last person left before he turned to look at Jerry and Sasha, then at me. His face had gone completely red, and I could see a vein pulsing in his forehead. He told them both to sit down and gestured for someone from HR to come back in. Jerry dropped into his chair and put his head in his hands, while Sasha kept standing there with tears running down her face. She kept saying it wasn't what it looked like, that we were all in the same room and nothing happened, that I was twisting an innocent situation into something dirty. I stood perfectly still near the doorway, watching Jerry's shoulders shake. His face cycled through so many expressions in just a few seconds. First, he looked shocked, like he couldn't believe I'd actually shown that photo to everyone. Then anger flashed across his features and his jaw clenched tight. Finally, panic set in, and his eyes darted around the room like he was looking for an escape route. Sasha turned to him for support, but he wouldn't even look at her. She said his name twice, but he just kept his head down, and his hands pressed against his temples. A woman from HR came back in with a notebook and sat down at the far end of the table. She asked if I had copies of everything I'd sent to their department. I nodded and told her it was all in the email with timestamps and receipts attached. Tristan told me I could leave now and that they'd be in touch about next steps. I picked up my laptop and walked out without looking back at Jerry or Sasha. The hallway felt too bright after the dim conference room. I made it about 10 steps before Jerry came rushing out behind me, calling my name. He caught up and tried to grab my arm, but I pulled away before he could touch me. He used that calm voice he always puts on when he wants to sound reasonable, the one that makes me feel crazy for being upset. He said we needed to talk about this like adults and work it out privately instead of making a scene at his workplace. I stopped walking and turned to face him. I told him everything goes through my attorney now and there's nothing to discuss between us anymore. He started to respond, but I walked away while he was still mid-sentence with my hands shaking, so hard I had to shove them in my pockets. My legs felt steady though, and I kept walking toward the elevator without looking back. I could hear him calling after me, but I pressed the button and waited, watching the numbers light up as the elevator climbed toward our floor. When the doors opened, I stepped inside and hit the lobby button. Jerry was still standing in the hallway staring at me when the doors slid shut. I drove straight to Josephine's office building across town, gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. The receptionist told me Josephine was with another client, but I said it was an emergency and I'd wait as long as needed. She made a phone call, and 5 minutes later, Josephine came out and brought me back to her office. I told her everything that just happened at Jerry's workplace, and she listened without interrupting, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, she asked if I'd kept copies of all the evidence I'd shown them. I pulled out my phone and showed her the backup files I'd saved to the cloud. She nodded and started making a list of immediate steps we needed to take. First thing was separating our bank accounts so Jerry couldn't drain them out of spite or panic. She walked me through how to open a new account in just my name and transfer half of everything from our joint savings and checking. Next, she told me to change all my passwords for email, social media, bank accounts, everything Jerry might know or guess. She said to start keeping a detailed log of every time Jerry tries to contact me, every call and text and visit, with dates and times and what was said. She pulled out a template spreadsheet and emailed it to me right there. I sat in her office for over an hour going through everything while she made phone calls and drafted documents. By late afternoon, I was back in my car checking my phone when an email came through from Ronan Gregory in HR. The subject line said, "Complaint Acknowledgement and Investigation Notice." I opened it sitting in Josephine's parking lot and read through the formal language. He confirmed they'd received my complaint and were opening an internal investigation into the company card usage and workplace conduct. The message was careful not to promise any specific outcomes or timeline. It said they'd be in touch with next steps, and thanked me for bringing these matters to their attention. Reading it made the whole thing feel more real, like it wasn't just my word against Jerry's anymore. I forwarded the email to Josephine and then sat there for a few minutes trying to process everything that had happened since this morning. I drove to my friend's house where I'd been crashing since I got back from Hawaii. She wasn't home from work yet, so I let myself in with the spare key she'd given me. I opened my laptop at her kitchen table and logged into our joint bank accounts. My stomach dropped when I saw how much money we had tied up together. How many years of saving and planning were sitting there in accounts with both our names on them. I opened the spreadsheet template Josephine had sent me and started documenting everything. Every transaction from the past 6 months, every shared credit card, every bill that came out of our joint account automatically. I listed the house and both cars and the retirement accounts and the savings bonds his parents had given us for our wedding. I went through our credit card statements line by line, marking which charges were mine, which were his, which were shared household expenses. I spent 3 hours building this spreadsheet, my eyes burning from staring at the screen and my back aching from hunching over the laptop. Josephine had said I needed to understand the full picture before we could protect my interests. Now I could see exactly how tangled our financial lives had become and how much work it would take to separate everything. I barely slept that night on my friend's couch. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Jerry's face in that conference room or heard Sasha's voice saying it wasn't what I thought. I gave up trying to sleep around 3 in the morning and pulled out my phone. I started making lists of everything I needed to do in the Notes app. Find my own apartment, something I could afford on just my salary. Focus on my own job and make sure this mess didn't affect my work performance. Build a support system that didn't include our mutual friends because I couldn't trust who would take his side. Get my own car insurance and health insurance. Change my emergency contacts and beneficiaries on everything. Update my address with the bank and credit cards once I found a place. The list kept growing and growing until it filled 3 full screens on my phone. But somehow writing it all down made it feel less overwhelming. The panic turned into a plan I could actually follow. Concrete steps instead of just fear and anger swirling around in my head. The next morning, I woke up to an email from Ronan asking me to come in for a formal interview. He said to bring any materials that supported my claims about the company card misuse. We scheduled it for Thursday afternoon, which gave me 2 days to organize everything. I spent most of Wednesday creating a timeline document with every receipt and screenshot arranged in order. The romantic beachfront dinner Jerry charged as client entertainment. The couple's massage booking for him and Sasha. The first-class ticket upgrade for her flight. I added the photo with the timestamp showing it was taken at 2 a.m. in our hotel room. I included screenshots of text messages between Jerry and Sasha with hearts and inside jokes. I put together a packet that told the whole story in documents that couldn't be argued with or explained away. Jerry started texting me from a number I didn't recognize on Wednesday night. The messages came in one after another, each one swinging between apologizing and accusing me. He said I'd humiliated him in front of his entire executive team and destroyed his reputation over nothing. He said I was overreacting to a simple misunderstanding and making it into something it wasn't. He said Sasha was just a friend and I was being jealous and crazy. Then the next message would say he was sorry and he never meant to hurt me. And could we please just talk? I took screenshots of every single message and forwarded them to Josephine without responding to any of them. She'd told me that engagement only gives him power, and the best thing I could do was document everything and stay silent. After I sent her the screenshots, I blocked the new number and put my phone on Do Not Disturb. Thursday morning, the company's finance department sent me a direct email asking for the receipts I'd mentioned in my message to HR. I replied with attachments of everything. The beachfront restaurant bill for 3 people charged to Jerry's corporate card with client entertainment written in the notes. The spa booking confirmation showing a couple's massage for Jerry and Sasha charged the same way. The airline receipt showing Sasha's ticket upgrade to first class, also on the company card, also labeled as client entertainment. I included the dates and amounts and a brief explanation that these were personal expenses for Jerry's coworker during what was supposed to be my anniversary trip. I hit send and felt a small surge of satisfaction, knowing that finance departments don't mess around when it comes to card misuse. My phone started blowing up with texts from mutual friends Thursday afternoon. They all wanted to know what happened and why I was trying to ruin Jerry's career over a misunderstanding. Some of them said I was overreacting, and that successful men always have close relationships with female coworkers. Others said I should have handled it privately instead of embarrassing him at work. A few said they'd heard his side of the story, and it sounded like I was making a bigger deal out of it than it really was. I read through the messages, feeling my chest get tighter with each one. None of these people had been there in that hotel room. None of them had watched my husband invite another woman into our anniversary bed. None of them had spent the flight home alone looking at photos of the two of them tangled together. I turned off all my notifications and decided I was done explaining myself to people who weren't there and didn't see what I saw. If they wanted to believe Jerry's version where he was the victim and I was the crazy jealous wife, that was their choice. I knew what I'd seen, and I had the evidence to prove it. Friday morning, I woke up on my friend's couch with my phone already in my hand and pulled up a search for therapists who handle divorce and betrayal. I scrolled through profiles for 20 minutes before finding Janelle Pittman, whose bio mentioned specializing in relationship trauma and helping people rebuild after major life changes. I clicked the booking link and saw the first available appointment was next Tuesday at 2 p.m. I selected it and entered my information, then stared at the confirmation email for a solid minute like it was some kind of proof that I was actually dealing with this instead of just surviving it. I added the appointment to my calendar and set 3 reminders because I couldn't trust my brain to remember anything important right now. That afternoon, I met Josephine at her office and she had papers ready for me to review. She explained she was filing for temporary court orders to freeze our joint accounts, so Jerry couldn't drain them or hide money before the divorce was final. The orders would also establish a no-contact rule requiring all communication to go through our attorneys instead of directly between us. She told me Jerry had already tried showing up at my temporary housing once, and these orders would give me legal protection if he violated them again. I signed everything she put in front of me and watched her make copies for the court filing. She said the judge would likely approve them within a week, and that gave me something concrete to hold on to. Back at my friend's place, I opened my laptop and started creating folders for all the evidence I needed to organize. I made one for photos, one for receipts, one for text messages, one for emails, and one for the credit card statements showing every charge Jerry made on the company card. I spent the rest of Friday and all of Saturday going through everything methodically, downloading files and sorting them by date and category. Every time I looked at the photos from Hawaii or read through the text exchanges, I felt my chest get tight and my hands start shaking, but I forced myself to keep going because this documentation was the only power I had. I created a detailed timeline showing when Jerry changed the restaurant reservation, when he booked the couple's massage, when he used the company card for Sasha's ticket, and when I took the photos of them in bed together. By Sunday afternoon, I had a complete packet ready for both HR and the compliance department, organized so clearly that anyone could follow exactly what happened and when. Wednesday evening, I was sitting at the kitchen table working on my laptop when I heard knocking at the front door. I looked up and saw Jerry through the window, standing on the porch and calling my name. He said we needed to talk face-to-face like reasonable adults, and work this out without lawyers getting in the way. I grabbed my phone and started recording video of him from where I sat, capturing his voice and his presence at the door. I didn't respond or move toward the door at all, just kept filming while he knocked and called out for another 5 minutes. After he finally left, I immediately texted Josephine and sent her the video file, explaining what happened and what time it occurred. She responded within 10 minutes saying this was a clear violation, and she would add it to our documentation for the court. Late that night, after my friend went to bed, I opened a blank document on my laptop and started writing about everything that happened. I wasn't planning to share it with anyone or post it online. I just needed to get my thoughts organized and clear in my own mind. I wrote about the airport, the hotel room, waking up at 2 in the morning and serving the divorce papers in the conference room. I wrote down a new rule for myself in bold letters at the bottom of the page. No defending my choices to people who weren't there. No explaining what I saw or felt to anyone except through proper legal channels. Just facts and evidence and letting the documentation speak for itself. Thursday morning, I drove to the office building where Jerry worked and met Ronan in a windowless conference room on the 3rd floor. A compliance officer sat next to him with a laptop open and ready to take notes on everything I said. They asked me to walk through the entire Hawaii trip from the beginning, and I stuck to specific facts and timeline details without adding emotional commentary or crying, even though my throat felt tight the whole time. Ronan asked detailed questions about when Jerry first mentioned having a work wife, when I noticed the restaurant reservation had been changed to 3 people, and the exact wording Jerry used when booking the couple's massage for himself and Sasha. I answered each question directly, and watched the compliance officer type everything into her laptop. They asked about every single charge on the company card, and I provided the dates, amounts, and the descriptions Jerry had entered for each one. The interview lasted almost 2 hours, and by the end my hands were cramped from gripping the edge of my chair. That afternoon, Ronan sent me an email asking me to provide the original photo files with full metadata intact and copies of the credit card statements showing each charge. I logged into my cloud storage and downloaded everything to a folder, then uploaded the files to the secure portal link he provided. The progress bar moved slowly as the photos and documents transferred, and I sat there watching it climb to 100%, while feeling completely exposed, but also determined to see this through the right way. Friday morning, Josephine called to tell me that Sebastian Page, Jerry's attorney, had filed a motion claiming I was causing reputational harm by making private marital issues public in his workplace. She said not to worry because she was already preparing a detailed response explaining that company card fraud and workplace boundary violations were legitimate compliance concerns, not private marital disputes. She told me the motion was a standard defensive tactic and the judge would see right through it. Tuesday afternoon, I drove to Janelle's office for my first therapy session and sat in a chair across from her while she asked me about what brought me in. I told her about Hawaii and the conference room and everything that happened since, and she listened without interrupting or looking shocked. She taught me some grounding techniques for when I felt my anxiety spike, like focusing on 5 things I could see and 4 things I could touch. We talked about the gaslighting patterns in Jerry's behavior over the past year, how he'd been slowly convincing me that my reactions were crazy when they were actually normal responses to real violations. She said my reaction wasn't excessive or unreasonable, that anyone would find what happened devastating and my choice to leave was completely valid. I left her office feeling raw but also lighter, like someone had finally confirmed that I wasn't making this bigger than it needed to be. That evening, while going through old message threads for the legal file, I found texts from late at night where Sasha mocked me to Jerry. She called me uptight and boring, said I didn't understand modern workplace culture, and that successful people had different relationship rules. She joked about me being jealous and said Jerry deserved someone who appreciated him properly. I read through the messages twice to make sure I understood them correctly, then forwarded the entire thread to both Josephine and Ronan with a brief note explaining when these were sent. This wasn't just about the company card anymore. This was evidence that both of them knew exactly what they were doing and thought it was funny that I didn't catch on sooner. Thursday morning, my phone rang with Ronan's number and I picked up immediately. He told me that Sasha filed a formal counter-complaint claiming I created a hostile work environment by publicly exposing her relationship with Jerry in front of senior leadership. I felt my gut twist but stayed quiet while he explained the process. He said this was a standard defensive move, that HR sees it all the time when someone gets caught violating policy. Josephine called me back within 20 minutes after I texted her about the counter-complaint, and she sounded completely calm. She explained that Sasha's complaint wouldn't hold up because my actions were reporting legitimate financial misconduct, not targeting her personally. The company card misuse was real, documented, and my business to report since Jerry used marital assets and company resources. She told me not to worry, that this was exactly the kind of predictable response she expected from someone trying to shift blame. Over the next week, Josephine worked on crafting detailed responses that clearly separated my personal divorce issues from the workplace policy violations Jerry committed. She showed me drafts where she outlined how the company card fraud was a compliance matter, not a marital dispute, and how my report to HR followed proper channels for financial misconduct. She explained that keeping these 2 lanes completely separate protected me from looking vindictive, while still holding the company accountable for real violations. I read through her responses 3 times, noting how carefully she worded everything to focus on facts and policy, rather than emotions or revenge. The following Tuesday, we went to court for the temporary orders hearing. I sat in the hallway outside the courtroom for 40 minutes watching other cases get called while my hands shook in my lap. When our turn came, I followed Josephine into the courtroom and sat at the table while she presented our requests for mutual restraining orders and temporary spousal support. Jerry's attorney argued that I was being unreasonable and vindictive, that Jerry needed access to marital funds for his own legal fees and living expenses. The judge listened to both sides without much expression, then granted mutual restraining orders prohibiting either of us from contacting each other except through attorneys. She set temporary spousal support at $800 a month, which was way less than I'd hoped for, but enough to help with basic expenses. Josephine whispered that this was actually pretty standard for temporary orders, and we could push for more in the final settlement. I left the courthouse feeling like I had some protection and breathing room, even if it wasn't everything I wanted. That afternoon, I met with a realtor to start apartment hunting. I gave her my budget based on my own income plus the temporary support, and she pulled up listings that were way smaller and less nice than the house Jerry and I shared. We drove around looking at one-bedroom apartments in safe neighborhoods, and I kept adjusting my expectations downward with each place. The third apartment had stained carpet and a tiny kitchen, but the building was secure and the rent fit my budget. I focused on finding something safe and affordable rather than trying to match what I was leaving behind. The realtor seemed to understand without me having to explain why I was doing this alone. 3 weeks after the conference room confrontation, Ronan called again to tell me that Jerry had been placed on paid administrative leave while they completed their investigation. I asked what that meant, and he explained that Jerry would stay home with full pay until HR and compliance finished reviewing all the evidence and interviewing relevant people. It felt like partial validation, proof that the company was taking this seriously, but I knew paid leave wasn't the same as being fired. Ronan couldn't promise what the final outcome would be, said the investigation could take another few weeks. I thanked him and hung up feeling like this was progress but not victory. A formal letter arrived from Sebastian the next Monday, printed on expensive letterhead and carefully worded by lawyers. The letter expressed regret for any distress caused to me during this difficult time, acknowledged that mistakes were made in judgment, and hoped we could move forward professionally. I read it twice looking for any actual admission of wrongdoing but found none. It was pure legal language designed to sound apologetic, without admitting anything that could be used in court. I forwarded it to Josephine without responding directly, following her advice that any personal communication with Jerry or his attorney could be twisted and used against me later. She replied within an hour saying this was exactly what she expected and to ignore it. Friday morning, I got an alert from my bank app showing several large transfers from our joint savings account. I opened the app and saw that Jerry had moved $12,000 out the day before the temporary orders took effect. I called Josephine immediately, and she told me to screenshot everything and send it to her right away. She said she would file an emergency motion to freeze the remaining funds and force Jerry to account for where the money went. I sat on my friend's couch staring at the transactions, feeling the betrayal cut even deeper, knowing he'd been planning his exit strategy while pretending to be reasonable. He'd taken that money knowing the court was about to restrict access, which meant he'd been thinking several steps ahead while I was just trying to survive. That weekend, I heard through mutual friends that people at Jerry's office were spreading rumors about me. They said I was a vindictive ex trying to destroy him over a midlife crisis, that I couldn't handle him having female friends at work, that I made everything public because I wanted attention. The rumors hurt more than I expected, knowing people were talking about me without knowing what really happened. But I refused to defend myself on social media or through the gossip chain. I trusted that the evidence would speak louder than workplace speculation, that HR had the receipts and photos and would make their own judgment. Josephine told me not to engage with any of it, that responding would only make me look defensive. Tuesday afternoon, I went back to Janelle's office for my second therapy session. She asked how I was handling everything, and I told her about the counter-complaint, the court hearing, the rumors, the money Jerry took. She listened and then helped me work through the grief and anger without letting them take over completely. She taught me to notice my triggers, like when I started spiraling into worst-case scenarios, or replaying the Hawaii trip over and over. She showed me how to respond to those triggers instead of just reacting, how to pause and choose what to do next rather than getting swept away by emotion. I left her office feeling raw, but also more in control of myself than I'd felt since everything started. Wednesday morning, I went back to the realtor and told her I wanted to put in an application for the apartment with the stained carpet. She walked me through the paperwork and I paid the deposit with money from my separate checking account, the one Jerry never had access to. Signing that lease felt bittersweet, like I was claiming my independence, but also admitting that the life I thought I was building with Jerry was completely over. The apartment represented starting fresh, but it also meant accepting that I was doing this alone. I took the keys and scheduled the move-in date for 2 weeks out, giving myself time to coordinate everything else that still needed handling. Thursday morning, I got the email from Ronan with an attachment labeled Preliminary Compliance Review. My hands shook as I opened the PDF and scanned through the formal language until I found the numbers. $8,342 in personal charges on Jerry's company card over 6 months. The report listed every dinner, every spa booking, every upgrade and gift charged as client entertainment when there was no client involved. Ronan called me an hour later and walked me through what happens next. The company would require full reimbursement within 90 days, and Jerry would face disciplinary action, but Ronan couldn't promise termination, because this was technically a first offense. I felt the disappointment settle in my chest, but I thanked him anyway, knowing this was more than nothing even if it wasn't everything. That afternoon, Josephine forwarded me an email from Sebastian proposing mediation instead of going to trial. He wrote that a court battle would drain both our bank accounts and drag this out for over a year, suggesting we try to reach a settlement through a neutral mediator. Josephine asked what I wanted to do, and I told her I'd agree, but only with strict rules. Everything goes through attorneys, no direct contact with Jerry allowed, and I can walk away the second he tries to manipulate or gaslight me. She drafted a response laying out my conditions, and Sebastian accepted them within 2 hours. The first mediation session happened the following Tuesday, in a bland office building with beige walls and uncomfortable chairs. The mediator was a woman in her 50s who explained the ground rules while Jerry sat across from me looking tired and older than I remembered. He started with an apology that blamed everything on work stress and the pressure of his position, saying he made poor choices but never meant to hurt me. When I didn't respond, he tried again, suggesting we could attend couples therapy to work through our communication issues and maybe save the marriage. I looked at the mediator and told her clearly that I'm not interested in couples therapy or saving anything. The mediator wrote something down and moved us to discussing asset division, but Jerry kept circling back to his apology like it should fix everything. I left that session feeling exhausted and frustrated, knowing this was going to take longer than I hoped. 2 days later, Ronan called with an update about Sasha. She was moved to a different department with no direct reporting relationship to Jerry, but the company decided not to terminate her employment. I felt my jaw clench hearing that she basically got away with everything while I'm the one rebuilding my entire life. Josephine reminded me during our call that my goal is protecting myself and moving forward, not making sure everyone involved gets punished the way I think they deserve. That weekend, I noticed Jerry posting on social media about being targeted and misunderstood. Vague messages that didn't name me but clearly painted himself as the victim. Several mutual friends liked and commented with supportive messages, asking if he was okay and saying they were there for him. I blocked 3 people who engaged with his posts and started going through my friend list, removing anyone who wanted gossip more than they wanted to actually support me. My real friends already knew what happened and didn't need Jerry's version to decide whose side they were on. Monday afternoon, I coordinated with a friend and called the non-emergency police line to arrange an escort while I retrieved my belongings from the house. The officer who showed up was professional and patient, waiting while I went through each room making a list of what I was taking. I documented everything with photos and left all of Jerry's things exactly where they were, not touching his desk or his closet or any of the items that were clearly his. The whole process felt humiliating, needing a police officer there to prevent my own husband from causing a scene, but I was grateful he stayed by the door the entire time. Jerry never showed up, probably warned by Sebastian to stay away, and I loaded everything into my friend's truck without incident. The second mediation session 2 weeks later went worse than the first. Jerry insisted he should keep the house because his income is higher and he can afford the mortgage payments on his own. I pushed back, saying we should either sell it and split the money, or he needs to buy out my half of the equity at fair market value. He acted like I was being unreasonable, claiming I'm trying to punish him financially instead of being practical about our situation. We went in circles for 3 hours until the mediator finally called it, scheduling a third session for 2 weeks out and suggesting we both think carefully about what we're willing to compromise on. I left feeling angry and stuck, knowing Jerry was going to drag this out as long as possible. That Thursday, Josephine asked me to come to her office for a reality check conversation. She walked me through what would likely happen if we went to trial, what the judge would probably award me versus what I'm asking for, and how much the whole process would cost in legal fees and emotional energy. I felt defensive at first, wanting her to tell me I deserved more and we should fight for everything. But she kept bringing me back to the numbers and the probabilities, helping me see that compromise might actually serve me better than fighting for total victory that might never come. Alone in my apartment that evening, I pulled up old photos from our wedding and the early years when things felt good. I went through them slowly, remembering who I thought Jerry was and who I thought we were together. Then I plugged in an external hard drive and moved every photo into an archive folder, organizing them by year before deleting them from my phone completely. It felt like a small ritual, but it helped, giving me permission to let go of the version of Jerry I'd built in my head, and accept that person never really existed. The next morning, a formal letter arrived from the company's HR department with the final outcome of their investigation. Jerry had to repay all personal charges within 90 days, lost his corporate card privileges permanently, and received a formal written warning that would stay in his personnel file. Sasha got a counseling memo about maintaining professional boundaries, but no financial penalty or formal discipline. I read through the letter twice, feeling that familiar mix of validation and frustration. It was something, proof that I wasn't crazy and the company took it seriously, but it wasn't the clean justice I'd imagined when I walked into that conference room. I filed the letter in my growing folder of divorce documents and tried to focus on what came next instead of what I wished had happened. Tuesday morning, I sat in Janelle's office for my third session, sinking into the worn couch while she pulled up her notes from last time. She asked me what I wanted from Jerry now, what would feel like enough, and I started listing all the ways he should suffer for what he did. She let me talk for maybe 5 minutes before gently interrupting. She told me to notice how exhausting it felt to carry all that anger, how much energy I was spending on imagining his punishment instead of building my own future. I felt defensive at first, wanting her to agree that he deserved everything coming to him. But she kept redirecting me back to what I could control, what boundaries I needed to protect myself, what choices would actually serve my healing. She explained that his consequences were his to carry, that whether he learned anything or changed at all wasn't my responsibility anymore. I left that session feeling lighter somehow, like I'd been given permission to stop tracking his suffering as proof of my worth. The realization settled in slowly over the next few days. My healing didn't depend on him hurting enough. Friday afternoon, my phone buzzed with a text from Michelle, a friend from our old neighborhood who still talked to both of us. She said Jerry wanted to know if we could discuss the house directly, instead of through lawyers, that it would save us both money and time. I felt that familiar irritation rise up, recognizing his manipulation even through a third party. I took a screenshot of the message and forwarded it to Josephine with a brief note explaining the context. She responded within an hour saying she'd handle it and reminding me not to engage with any indirect contact attempts. I felt proud of myself for documenting instead of responding, for maintaining the boundary even when he tried to work around it. Monday morning brought a formal notice from the court setting a trial date 4 months out if we couldn't reach a settlement agreement. I stared at the date circled on the paperwork, feeling exhaustion wash over me at the thought of 4 more months of this dragging on. The idea of sitting in a courtroom while lawyers argued over every dish and photo album made me want to cry. I called Josephine and told her I wanted to keep trying mediation, that I needed this finished more than I needed to punish Jerry in front of a judge. She agreed it was the smart choice and scheduled our 3rd mediation session for the following week. That evening, I sat at my friend's kitchen table with my laptop open, looking at the spreadsheet I'd been maintaining of every charge Jerry made, every small reimbursement he owed me, every petty detail I'd been tracking for weeks. I realized I was spending hours on things that would maybe net me a few $100s while the real assets sat there waiting to be divided. I made a choice right then to let go of the scorekeeping, to stop tracking the $15 he owed me for takeout, or the $23 for gas. I deleted half the spreadsheet and reorganized what remained around the house equity, retirement accounts, and spousal support terms that would actually impact my future. Letting go of those petty details felt like releasing weight I didn't know I was carrying. The 3rd mediation session happened on a gray Thursday morning in a conference room that smelled like burnt coffee. Josephine and Sebastian went back and forth for 3 hours, while Jerry and I sat at opposite ends of the table avoiding eye contact. Around noon, Sebastian proposed that Jerry would pay 40% of my legal fees and buy out my share of the furniture at fair market value based on recent comparable sales. Josephine countered at 60% of legal fees, and I watched them negotiate down to 50%, which felt fair enough given the circumstances. Jerry agreed to the furniture buyout if I provided receipts for the original purchase prices. These small wins added up to something that felt like actual progress, like we might finish this without destroying each other completely. 2 days later, an email arrived from the company's HR system with Sasha's name in the sender field, but clearly drafted by their legal team. The message acknowledged her role in violating workplace boundaries and expressed regret for any discomfort her actions caused. Every word was carefully chosen to avoid admitting liability or giving me ammunition for any future claims. I read it twice, recognizing it as corporate damage control rather than genuine remorse. I clicked the formal acknowledgement button in the HR system without writing a personal response, understanding that this was the most I would get from her. Saturday afternoon, I finished moving the last boxes into my new apartment, a modest 1-bedroom in a quiet building 20 minutes from work. My friend helped me carry the couch up 3 flights of stairs and then left me alone to unpack. I sat on the floor surrounded by boxes as the sun went down, feeling the weight of both loneliness and freedom settle into my chest. This wasn't the life I'd planned when I married Jerry, wasn't the future I'd imagined when we bought that house together. But it was mine, bought with my own choices and protected by boundaries I was learning to maintain. The 4th mediation session stretched over 6 hours with only brief breaks for bathroom trips and stale sandwiches from the building cafeteria. We worked through the division of retirement accounts with Josephine and Sebastian trading proposals about percentage splits and rollover timelines. The spousal support discussion took another 2 hours, with Jerry's attorney arguing for minimal duration, while Josephine pushed for enough time for me to get stable. We settled on 18 months of modest monthly payments that would cover the gap between my income and my new expenses. By late afternoon, we had a nearly complete term sheet covering every major asset and debt, with only a few minor details left to resolve. I left feeling cautiously optimistic that we could actually finish this without going to trial. The final settlement negotiations happened over email and phone calls during the following week, with our attorneys trading marked-up versions of the agreement. Jerry would keep the house in exchange for paying me a lump sum for my equity based on the current appraisal. The amount was less than I'd hoped for, but more than I'd feared, enough to cover my apartment expenses for a year while I rebuilt my savings. The spousal support terms stayed at 18 months, which wasn't forever but gave me breathing room. It wasn't perfect, but it was fair enough, and when Josephine sent me the final version to review, I read through it 3 times before signing my name at the bottom. I felt relief mixed with grief for what I was officially ending, for the marriage I'd thought we had, and the future I'd believed we were building. The court clerk called the following Tuesday to confirm they'd received our settlement agreement, and both attorneys had submitted the required paperwork. She explained that the judge would review everything within 2 weeks, and then issue the final divorce decree pending our signatures and a 30-day waiting period. I marked the date on my calendar, counting down to when this would be legally finished, when I could stop being Jerry's wife and start being just myself. A few weeks later, an email landed in my inbox from Jerry's company with the subject line, Updated Corporate Policies. I opened it out of curiosity, and found myself reading through new rules about corporate card usage, expense documentation requirements, and mandatory disclosure forms for workplace relationships. The language was carefully written to sound general, but I recognized specific phrases that came directly from my situation. Employees could no longer charge personal travel for non-employees to company cards, even with plans to reimburse later. Romantic or close personal relationships with coworkers had to be disclosed to HR within 30 days. Couples massages and intimate dinners required manager approval and couldn't be labeled as client entertainment. I sat there staring at my laptop screen, feeling this weird mix of satisfaction and frustration. My confrontation had actually changed something real, created protections for other people who might face similar situations. But nobody would ever know it came from me, that I was the reason these rules existed. The policy update didn't mention names or specific incidents, just presented the changes as part of regular compliance reviews. I forwarded the email to Josephine with a short message asking if she'd seen it. She replied within an hour saying this was exactly the kind of institutional change that mattered more than individual punishment, even if it felt invisible. I saved the email in a folder and closed my laptop, trying to feel proud instead of bitter about the lack of recognition. 2 days after that, my phone buzzed with a text from someone I barely remembered, a woman who used to work in Jerry's department before transferring to a different office. She asked if I'd heard the news about Jerry getting moved to a new role. I typed back asking what she meant, and she sent 3 paragraphs of detailed gossip about how he was quietly reassigned to a position with way less client contact and almost no travel privileges. His new job title sounded similar, but everyone in the office knew it was a step down, less prestigious, and fewer opportunities for advancement. The woman said people were whispering about why it happened, but nobody had official answers, just rumors about policy violations and HR investigations. I read through her messages twice, processing the information. Jerry's career had taken a real hit, but he wasn't fired or publicly disgraced. He still had his job, still made good money, just with reduced status and fewer perks. It matched exactly what Josephine had predicted months ago when I was pushing for him to be terminated. She'd told me that companies rarely fire executives over first-time policy violations, especially when the person agrees to repay money and accept consequences. I thanked the woman for the update and didn't ask for more details, realizing I didn't actually want to know every small piece of Jerry's professional downfall. That same week, I heard through another former connection that Sasha had left the company entirely. The person who told me wasn't sure if she resigned on her own or was pushed out during the policy changes, but either way, she was gone within 3 weeks of the new rules taking effect. I waited for some big emotional reaction to hit me, anger or satisfaction or vindication. Instead, I felt mostly nothing, just a distant awareness that she was dealing with her own consequences somewhere else. I'd moved past the anger phase into something more focused on my own rebuilding, and Sasha's departure felt like old news from a chapter I was already closing. My 6th therapy session with Janelle happened on a Thursday afternoon, and we spent the whole hour on practical planning instead of emotional processing. She had me pull out my laptop and open a budgeting spreadsheet, walking through realistic numbers for rent, utilities, groceries, and discretionary spending. We built a daily routine structure that included morning movement, regular mealtimes, and wind-down activities before bed. Then we made a list of my friendships, categorizing them into people who actively supported me, people who stayed neutral, and people who clearly sided with Jerry or wanted drama. Janelle helped me see that I was building something new, rather than just surviving the wreckage of what fell apart. She pointed out specific examples of choices I'd made that showed growth, like declining to engage with Jerry's manipulation attempts or setting boundaries with pushy friends. By the end of the session, I had concrete action items that felt manageable instead of overwhelming, a roadmap for the next few months that didn't depend on what Jerry did or didn't do. The following Monday, I took a personal day from work and spent it at the bank handling financial separation tasks. I closed our joint checking account and opened a new one in just my name, transferring my portion of the remaining balance. The joint savings account took longer because it required both signatures, but Josephine had already coordinated with Sebastian to get Jerry's authorization. I applied for 2 credit cards in my own name, something I should have done years ago instead of relying on our shared accounts. The bank representative walked me through setting up an emergency fund with automatic transfers, starting small but building over time. Each step felt surprisingly empowering, like I was creating a foundation that belonged entirely to me and couldn't be undermined by someone else's choices or betrayals. I left the bank with a folder full of new account paperwork and a strange sense of pride in my own financial independence. That weekend, a text arrived from mutual friends inviting me to a birthday gathering at someone's house. I almost said yes automatically before scrolling down and seeing the full guest list they'd shared. Jerry's name was right there in the middle, along with several people who'd taken his side or stayed neutral during the divorce. I sat with my phone for a long time, typing and deleting different responses. Finally, I sent a polite message saying I had other plans, but hoped they had a great time, then immediately made actual other plans, so it wouldn't be a lie. I texted a friend from work and arranged to try a new restaurant that same night, choosing my own comfort over maintaining appearances or avoiding awkwardness for other people. It stung to lose some social connections and know I was excluded from future events, but I was learning that protecting my peace mattered more than staying in circles where I felt uncomfortable. On Tuesday morning, Sebastian sent Josephine a long email listing household items Jerry wanted from our marriage. Things worth less than $50 like a specific coffee maker, a set of kitchen knives, and some decorative picture frames. The message was written in this petty, detailed way that made it clear he was trying to irritate me or drag out the process. I forwarded it to Josephine with a short instruction to agree to whatever Jerry wanted, that I didn't care about any of those items enough to fight. She wrote back asking if I was sure, and I confirmed that the energy it would take to argue over a coffee maker wasn't worth whatever satisfaction I might get from winning. Some battles just weren't worth fighting, and I was learning to recognize which ones actually mattered for my future, versus which ones were just about scoring points. I started building new daily routines in my apartment that had nothing to do with my old life with Jerry. Morning walks became non-negotiable, a way to start each day with movement and fresh air before work stress kicked in. I experimented with cooking meals I actually enjoyed instead of the things Jerry preferred, discovering I liked trying new recipes and eating dinner at my own pace. Reading before bed replaced scrolling through my phone, giving my brain something to focus on besides replaying arguments or imagining confrontations. Some nights I still felt crushingly lonely, sitting in my quiet apartment with nobody to talk to and nothing to distract me from my own thoughts. But I was learning to sit with the loneliness instead of running from it, or trying to fill it with someone else, recognizing it as part of healing rather than something to avoid. Janelle had taught me that discomfort didn't mean I was doing something wrong. Sometimes it just meant I was doing something hard and necessary. 3 weeks into my new routines, my car started making a weird grinding noise that got worse every time I drove. I took it to a mechanic who gave me the bad news that I needed brake work and a transmission service, repairs that would cost almost $800. The bill strained my carefully planned budget, and meant I'd have to cut back on discretionary spending for the next month, maybe skip the gym membership renewal, or eat more meals at home. My first instinct was to call Jerry and ask him to cover half since the car problem started while we were still married. Instead, I approved the repairs, adjusted my budget spreadsheet, and figured out which expenses I could reduce to make it work. The self-reliance felt hard-won and precious, proof that I could solve my own problems without depending on someone who'd proven unreliable. I paid the mechanic with my own credit card and drove home feeling capable in a way I hadn't felt in years. Late one night when I couldn't sleep, I opened my laptop and started writing a long email to Jerry. I typed out everything I wished I could say about the betrayal, about the lies and manipulation, about how he'd made me feel crazy for noticing what was right in front of me. The words poured out for almost an hour, pages of hurt and anger and disappointment that I'd been holding back through all the legal proceedings and mediation sessions. When I finished, I read through the whole thing 3 times, editing and adding details, making sure every point was clear. Then I closed the draft without sending it and went back to bed, leaving it sitting in my email folder. The next day in therapy, I told Janelle about writing the email, and she helped me understand that I'd been writing it for my own closure, not because Jerry deserved to hear it, or would even understand what I was trying to say. She pointed out that sending it would just give him another opportunity to deflect, gaslight, or turn my pain into something about him. The email had served its purpose by helping me organize my thoughts and feelings, and deleting it without sending was actually the stronger choice. I went home that afternoon and moved the draft to my trash folder, then emptied the trash so I couldn't change my mind later. 3 weeks later, the thick envelope arrived from the court with the official divorce decree inside. I opened it standing in my kitchen and pulled out the stamped documents that made everything final. The legal language felt cold and formal, reducing 7 years of marriage to property division and support terms. But seeing my signature next to Jerry's on the last page made my hands shake. I sat down at my small dining table and spread the papers out in front of me, reading through each section slowly, even though I'd reviewed the settlement terms a dozen times already. Relief washed over me first, knowing I could finally stop waiting for the next legal hurdle or Jerry's next manipulation attempt. Then grief hit harder than I expected, not for Jerry himself, but for the life I thought we were building and the person I used to be before Hawaii. I sat there for almost an hour just holding the papers, feeling the strange mix of emotions without trying to push any of them away. When I finally filed the documents in my desk drawer, I felt something close to pride that I'd made it through to the other side without compromising my boundaries or letting Jerry gaslight me into thinking I was overreacting. That weekend, I spent Saturday afternoon organizing my digital files and archiving every photo, screenshot, and receipt related to the divorce into a password-protected folder on an external hard drive. I labeled it clearly so I could find it if needed for taxes or legal purposes, then moved the whole drive to the back of my closet where I wouldn't see it every day. The workplace gossip group chat still had new messages every few days with people discussing Jerry and Sasha like they were characters in a soap opera, analyzing every detail and adding their own speculation about what really happened. I scrolled through the latest round of messages and felt nothing, but exhaustion at seeing my pain turned into entertainment for people who barely knew me. I clicked the leave group button without announcing my departure or explaining my decision to anyone. On Monday morning at my own job, I asked my manager if we could talk privately about taking on more responsibility. She closed her office door and listened while I explained that I wanted a challenging assignment that would help me focus on my career and prove my capabilities beyond what I'd been doing. I didn't mention the divorce directly, but she'd heard enough through the office to understand what I was really asking for. She pulled up her project list and offered me a high-visibility client presentation that would require research, strategy development, and direct executive contact. The assignment scared me a little, but I accepted immediately, feeling capable and valued in a way I hadn't felt in months. Walking back to my desk with the project details, I realized how much I'd let my identity shrink down to being Jerry's wife, and then Jerry's victim, and how good it felt to be recognized for my actual professional skills. 2 days later, a handwritten note arrived at my office in a plain envelope with no return address. I opened it carefully and recognized Ronan's signature at the bottom, before reading the brief message acknowledging that my complaint had led to meaningful changes in company policy around expense reporting and workplace relationship disclosure. He explained that company rules prevented him from publicly crediting me or sharing investigation details, but he wanted me to know that other employees would benefit from the stronger protections now in place. I read the note twice and tucked it into my desk drawer, appreciating the private validation even though nobody else would ever know my role in improving those policies. Knowing I'd made a difference beyond my personal situation felt more satisfying than any public vindication could have been. 6 months after walking into that conference room with divorce papers and evidence photos, I sat in my apartment on a Saturday morning with coffee and a small plant I'd bought for the windowsill the week before. Sunlight came through the window and hit the leaves just right, making them glow green against the white wall. I felt something close to peace sitting there in my own space, surrounded by furniture I'd chosen, and a life I was building entirely on my own terms. The divorce hadn't given me perfect justice or total vindication, and Jerry's career had taken a hit, but not collapsed entirely the way part of me had wanted. But I'd gotten out with my dignity intact, and learned to set boundaries that actually protected me instead of just keeping the peace. I'd stopped waiting for other people to validate my experience or punish Jerry on my behalf, focusing instead on building a life where his choices couldn't hurt me anymore. The real win turned out to be learning that I could trust my own judgment, stand up for myself even when it got messy, and choose my own well-being over maintaining appearances. I took another sip of coffee and looked at my plant, thinking about how much could grow in 6 months when you gave it the right conditions. So yeah, that's the story. Just me, you, and a random moment from life that somehow turned into a full video. Thanks for hanging out, seriously. Subscribe if you want to chill here again next time.